And we are back. Happy New Year. What happens when two disturbed minds get together? Serial killing, of course. Welcome to another episode of the True Crime Remixed, where I, Omega Keys, along with my girls, cover vengeance, scams, murder, and strange disappearances from the Black perspective. Kathy is off working on a movie today, but we still want to give our girl a shout out.
Hey, Kathy.
Yes, this episode is about Alton Coleman and Debra Brown. They are our players, otherwise known as the serial killers that were crisscrossing the Midwest, just killing everybody. For this episode, I want to put this disclaimer out here. Alton and Debra did not discriminate. They were killing elderly and children. So if you are very sensitive to that, like, we're not going to go into full detail on some of that, but just so you know, they did not discriminate in their killing. So, Alton Coleman was born November 6, 1955. In pulling his clemency report, we uncovered that Alton was born and raised in a brothel. At one point, he was abandoned in a garbage can by his mother, who suffered mental illness. He ended up being raised by his 73-year-old grandmother, who operated the brothel and a gambling house inside of her home. In this environment, Alton was exposed to numerous disturbing experiences, to include witnessing group sex, sometimes including his mother and grandmother. I could just say ew at this point. Pedophilia and bestiality.
I think I just spit up in my mouth.
In addition, he twice suffered head injuries that required hospitalization. His IQ was found to be far below average, and he suffered from borderline personality disorder. His mental illness manifested through extremes of emotion, impulsive behavior, and psychotic episodes. Although Coleman's mother suffered mental illness, she worked 3 jobs. Coleman was a middle school dropout and well known to Illinois law enforcement. He was charged with sex crimes between 1973 and 1983. 2 of those cases were dismissed, with Coleman pleading guilty to a lesser charge and on 2, and another 2 he was acquitted. Alton was scheduled to go on trial in Illinois on charges stemming from the rape of a 14-year-old girl when he fled and began his killing spree. Alton was diagnosed with a mixed personality disorder with antisocial, narcissistic, and obsessive features, with additional diagnoses including epileptic spasms, psychosis, and borderline personality disorder. Alton had a whole lot going on. Debra was born November 11th, 1962, and also suffered head trauma as a child and was considered intellectually disabled. She was one of 11 children and did not have a previous criminal record. She met Alton while engaged to another man in 1983. She
left her family
and moved in with Alton shortly after. So, Debra was engaged to someone else and living with her family.
Minding her own business.
Alton comes along. Hey, girl, what's up? Want to go on this killing spree? Let's roll.
Sure, I'm out.
Because shortly after, after leaving her betrothed, the killing spree started, like just a few months after. So we're just trying to figure out what made her leave that situation to be like, nah, you know what? Hanging with the serial killer better. Like,
can't imagine.
And why didn't Alton kill her?
It goes back to that whole loyalty thing, I think.
I guess. May 1984, Alton befriended Juanita Wheat. He used his friendship to abduct Juanita's 9-year-old daughter, Vernetta, on May 29th, 1984, from Wisconsin and took her to Waukegan, Illinois. Vernetta was raped and strangled. Her body was found on June 19th, 1984, just blocks away from Alton's grandmother's apartment. However, by the time the body was discovered, the couple had fled. Alton borrowed a car from Robert Carpenter on May 31st, 1984. He said he was going to the store and he never returned. Can you imagine? Can you imagine realizing that you let someone borrow your car and they turn out to be serial killer?
Cannot.
Like that would just
cannot. That's like the pastors that let them, that took them or whatever, and then they came back. I would leave my house.
Yeah, we're gonna get to them pastors in a little bit. We're gonna get to them. The couple found their way to Indiana in 1984, and they encountered two young girls in Gary, 9-year-old Annie and 7-year-old Tamika. They abducted and sexually assaulted the two girls. Annie survived, but poor little Tamika did not. Tamika's body was found on June 19th, the very same day that 25-year-old Donna Williams from Gary also disappeared. Her body was found on July 11th, about a half a mile from where her car was found. She had been raped and strangled as well. Like, that's their MO, this strangulation, raping and strangling is just insane. At this point, Alton and Debra were getting bolder. On June 28th, before Donna's body was found, they were already on to their next victims. The couple entered the home of Mr. and Miss Palmer Jones. They beat them within inches of their life. Alton ripped the telephone from their wall so they couldn't make any calls. Remember, this was 1984. There were no cell phones. The couple then stole the Palmer's money in their car and headed to Ohio. So back then, you want to silence somebody's phone, why you just snatch the joke off of the one? You ain't talking to no damn body. That's just.
It was either a snatch or a cut the wire.
Yeah, cut the wires from the box, anything. But back then, that's how it went. So just remember the time frame when we're talking about taking away a cell phone or something like that, because that's crazy.
Speaking of crazy, you know we love true crime, and guess what? We are also filmmakers. Join us January 28th for the premiere of our crime thriller, Keeping Secrets. Get tickets on Eventbrite, and if you can't join us, watch the movie on Amazon starting June 29th. Once again, that is our movie. Yes, ours, and it's called Keeping Secrets. Join us at the premiere on January 28th, or watch us on Amazon on January 29th. And go ahead and leave us a review while you're at it.
All right. Ohio, as if things weren't bad enough, Ohio is where things really escalated. On July 25th, Debra and Alton arrived in Toledo, Ohio, where Alton befriended Virginia Temple, the mother of several children. When Temple stopped communicating with her relatives, authorities entered her home and found her young children alone and frightened. Temple and the oldest child, Rachel, who was only 9 years old, had been strangled to death and left in a crawl space. And we're talking about the 80s, so the crawl space on some of them homes, I'm just like envisioning what the crawl space was in the home that we grew up in. Right. In that area, because I grew up in Indiana, it was kind of close to that Chicago area, but on the Indiana side, them crawl spaces, they were like literally these little cubby holes up under the house, or they were like these old cellars that were full of sand, and not something that it just was very bad.
I just can't imagine them being there, you know what I mean, and not having any way to like call or get help, and that's terrible. The traumatic impact on that, from that alone.
Yeah. Ugh. On the same morning as the Temple murders, Alton and Coleman Brown entered the home of Frank and Dorothy Duvendak in Toledo, where they both were bound with electrical cords which had been cut. The couple stole the Duvendak's money and car, and Miss Duvendak's stolen watch was later found under another victim. Later that day, Alton and Debra visited the Dayton home of Reverend Millard Gay and his wife. The two stayed with the Gays and accompanied them to a religious service on July 9th, where the next day the Gays dropped off the couple in downtown Cincinnati. Hold up. So they sat there and they just killed somebody, jumped over there with the gays. They actually went to a religious,
went to church. Yeah.
I wonder if that's what saved them, because they only took the vehicle and then left.
Yeah.
They didn't even beat them up.
They did not.
They didn't beat them up. So the church, we're gonna say the church saved them.
Yes.
In some, these people, ugh. Okay. Yeah. On July 12th, Tiny Story, a 15-year-old girl who lived in Cincinnati over the Rhine neighborhood, disappeared. Her body was discovered 8 days later. A bracelet that had been stolen from the temples was found under Story's body. On the day of Story's disappearance, Tiny Story, because I hate saying just the last name when it's a child. On the day of Tiny Story's disappearance, the FBI added Alton to its 10 most wanted list as a special edition as the 11th most wanted. Coleman was just the 10th person since the initiation of the list in 1950 to inherit inclusion in such a manner. Alton and Debra bicycled into Norwood on July 13th at 9:30 a.m. Hold up. We're laughing right here because we're thinking about that time frame, and we know what it was like because we grew up in this era. So we imagine them being on the bikes and, like her she's either sitting there on the handlebars while he's pedaling, or she's on them big spokes on the back, standing up riding, and they're just pedaling along, off to their next killing spree. That's like
you don't have no rides.
No rides. That's what they're doing. After all the other vehicles they stole, now you're pedaling. All right. So less than 3 hours later, they drove away in a car belonging to Harry Walters, who they left unconscious, and his wife, Marlene, who was raped and beaten to death. Walters survived and later testified that they had met the couple to discuss their potential purchase of a camper, but that Coleman attacked them with a wooden candlestick. The coroner indicated Marlene had been bludgeoned approximately 20 to 25 times during her violent assault. Shards of broken soda bottle, which bore Coleman's fingerprints, were found in the living room, and bloody fingerprints made by 2 different pair of shoes were found in the basement. The Walters' red Plymouth Reliant, as well as money, jewelry, and shoes were stolen. 2 bicycles, clothes, and shoes not belonging to the Walters had been left behind. So basically, the couple sat there, they changed out of their shoes and stole another good pair of shoes, left all type of evidence behind, and then went on their way. They pedaled there and then drove off in the people's car after beating them up. And that was definitely a serious beating, 20 to 25 blows. That's some extreme rage for people that you don't know to beat them down like that. That's a lot. 2 days later, the Plymouth was found abandoned in Kentucky, where Alton and Debra Brown had kidnapped O'Line Carmichael Jr., a college professor from Williamsburg, and drove back to Ohio with Carmichael locked in the trunk of his own car. On July 17th, they abandoned this stolen vehicle in Dayton, and Carmichael, who was still locked in the trunk, was rescued by authorities. Got lucky.
They did.
Coleman Brown returned to the home of the Gays, accosting them with guns this time. Reverend Gay, who was at the time recognized Alton as was the most wanted fugitive, said, "Why do you want to do us like that?" Alton responded, "I'm not going to kill you, but generally we kill them where we go." This dude. Coleman and Brown took their car and headed back toward Evanston, Illinois. Along the way, they stole another car in Indianapolis and killed its owner, 75-year-old Eugene Scott. 3 days later, on July 20th, Coleman and Brown were arrested in Evanston. As they walked westward across the intersection, they passed immediately in front of a motorist who was from Alton Coleman's neighborhood in Waukegan. The motorist drove to a gas station and notified the police by payphone. Can you imagine? Are you driving down the street and you see these killers that you know? Like, I probably would have almost crashed. Right, trying to hold on, back then they had to actually get to a payphone, so you didn't even have a cell phone. You trying to get down there to
like
call about these people.
Friend.
Yeah, somebody that you actually know and that you've seen on America's Most Wanted. And you see them. This is just crazy. The couple were soon spotted sitting on a portable bleachers in an empty Mason Park. As two police sergeants approached, Alton and Debra were observed walking away toward the rear of the park. Two other officers stopped Debra as she tried to exit the park, searched her, and found a gun in her purse. The pair were taken into custody without incident and transported to the Evanston police station, where both were identified by their fingerprints. As Coleman was strip searched, a steak knife was found between two pairs of sweat socks he was wearing. A shopping bag full of varied t-shirts and caps was found in the couple's possession. Officers learned that the pair had stopped every 3 to 4 blocks as they walked and changed their shirts and caps. Okay, so this couple walking down the street trying to be discreet, like, hey, we done reached our 3rd block, we need to change. I don't know if they were like dipping off into
shrubbery,
right? What they were doing, but hey, we made it 3 or 4 blocks. Let's change. Put the hat on. Nobody gonna know us now. Like, it was just it's almost cartoonish, but it goes into how they said that they were intellectually challenged as well.
This is true.
That mindset, and it's also as like how often it's in the same rhythm of how often they were switching vehicles too.
That's true.
Because they were switching vehicles just like they were switching clothes.
That's true.
Like, and leaving their shoes behind and switching other shoes. I don't get
Why
that
do you think
one.
they was just sitting on the bench?
And plotting next. Plotting. I think they were plotting. Sitting on the bench plotting. What they gonna do next? A week after their arrest, more than 50 law enforcement officials from 6 jurisdictions met to plan their strategy for prosecuting Coleman and Brown. Seeking the death penalty for Coleman and Brown, Michigan was quickly ruled out because it did not employ capital punishment. It was decided to give Ohio the first attempt at sentencing, with U.S. District Attorney Dan K. Webb stating, "We are convinced that prosecution in Ohio can most quickly and most likely result in swift imposition of the death penalty against Alton and Debra Brown." The state of Ohio convicted Coleman and Brown, finding them guilty of rape and murder of Tiny Story in Cincinnati and Marlene Walters in Norwood, but not for the murders of Virginia and Rachel Temple in Toledo. Coleman and Brown were both sentenced to death. Coleman's case was sent to the U.S. Supreme Court several times between 1985 and 2022. But his numerous arguments that his conviction and death were unconstitutional failed to sway the justices. I wonder why.
Right.
However, Coleman's death sentence in relation to the Story killing was overturned in a separate proceedings. Despite this, Coleman's death sentence in relation to the Walters murder remained upheld. In addition to the death sentences, Coleman and Brown were each sentenced to 20 years in prison for transporting their kidnapped victim, Oline Carmichael, across the state lines.
That was the professor.
The one that was found in the trunk.
Uh-huh.
The one in the trunk. On April 25th, 2002, the Ohio Supreme Court rejected a claim by Alton Coleman's attorney that the state planned to accommodate the large number of victims and supervisors who wanted to view the execution would turn into a spectator sport. So many victims and survivors of Alton Coleman's crimes were allowed to witness the execution that prison officials had to set up a closed-circuit viewing venue outside the building. For his last meal, Coleman ordered a well-done filet mignon smothered with mushrooms, fried chicken breast, a salad with French dressing, sweet potato pie topped with whipped cream, French fries, collard greens, onion rings, cornbread, broccoli with melted cheese, biscuits and gravy, and a cherry Coke.
You name it.
Right. Greens, beans, potatoes, yes. Yes.
That's crazy.
Before his execution letter, Before his execution, he released a letter apologizing for what he had done. But hold on. That menu list that goes into his mental state too, because he's ordering like a kid to me everything off the menu.
Right. All my favorite things.
Yeah, that's really wild. But the fact that they got it all for him too is wild too. Like,
do they have to do that?
I mean, it's your last meal. They're killing you anyway. I mean, they could work hard at it. I don't know. I guess.
I wonder if it's good.
Probably not. On April 26, reciting Psalm 23, Alton Coleman was executed by lethal injection in the death chamber at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility in Lucaville. Reginald Wilkerson, director of the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction, said Coleman had not directly expressed remorse for the killings, but that he had admitted what he had done in his own convoluted way.
And that was the best that he could probably come up with.
Probably. Coleman had received 2 death sentences from Ohio and 1 each from Illinois and Indiana. At the time of his execution, he was the only condemned person in the United States to have death sentences in 3 states. Brown was originally sentenced to be executed in Ohio for her complicity in the crimes. Had her death sentences commuted to life imprisonment by Governor Richard Celeste in 1991. In commuting Brown's sentence, Celeste cited her low IQ scores, ranging from 59 to 74, and her master-slave relationship with Coleman influencing her actions. Brown was one of 8 death row inmates, including all 4 of Ohio's female death row inmates, to have her sentence commuted by Celeste, a staunch opponent of capital punishment, a week before he left office. So basically, on his way out the door, he was like, you know
what? Let me help y'all.
I'm going to take y'all off death row. Yeah. On their way out the door. Despite her nonviolent history before the spree, Debra Brown was initially unrepentant for her acts. During the sentencing phase of her first Ohio trial, she sent a note to the judge, which read in part. This tripped me out because she actually, hold up. She sent this note.
Yes, she did.
She sent this note to the judge, and it said, I killed the bitch, and I don't give a damn. I had fun out of it. That's just like you went out your way to send that letter. You went your way to send a letter to the judge. So
someone tell her maybe you should write the judge.
I don't know what happened because I don't think during this time her and Alton had communication. And my thing is, if it was a master-slave relationship, I mean, I don't know how all of that works, but you're away from him, so you shouldn't be making it even worse on yourself by saying, I'm glad I did this, whatever, because he's not telling you to do this at this point. You did that on your own, so it was crazy. Whatever.
Exactly, and you just got a pass from the dude.
That part.
So why are we antagonizing judges?
Right, that part. So anyway. Whew. She was also given a death sentence for the murder of Tamika Turks in Indiana. However, that sentence was ultimately commuted to 140 years of imprisonment in 2018. So 140 years, even if she did get parole, I mean, that parole would be after one of the life sentences that she had 140 years. She's not getting out even by the time she would ever see parole, if she ever got paroled, if it was even an option, which I don't think it was, it wouldn't have been no way. No, you're definitely not getting out. Debra is currently serving her sentence without the possibility of parole.
Like we said.
Like we just said, at the Dayton Correctional Institution in Dayton, Ohio. She finally expressed remorse for her crimes when she apologized to the victim's family in a video of 2005. So basically, she apologized to the victims after that. I don't know what made her apologize then. Maybe she thought she can get parole if she did. It clicked in her brain like, maybe I better act right and get a little bit of leniency here. But in 2005, at least she finally apologized, because that was just so mean and nasty after you'd already killed these people, to add that salt to that wound in the letters to the judge.
Right. But how do you got to be tired of carrying around all that too. That's a lot of weight.
It is. This part right here is hearsay, but I'm going to go ahead and include it. Some authorities that believe that Debra and Alton, who were both Afro-American, I hate when they say it like that. Like, I hate Afro-American.
But it was a time.
No. I don't know if it's the time. They still be trying to other us, so I don't like it. Usually selected Black victims because they knew that they would blend in better with the Black community, noting that their crimes lacked a racial motive. However, on page 184 of the Anatomy of Motive, Johnny Douglas, a retired FBI profiler, states that Coleman, in the middle of a vicious sexual assault, went into a particularly incoherent tirade about how Blacks were forcing him to rape and murder other Blacks, as if that could somehow justify and explain his actions. Debra and Alton left a racist slogan, "All information is alleged," written in lipstick at the scene and rape and murder of Tiny Story, one of the victims who was not African American. So this floors me. So, like, if you're saying that they were racist and going against Black people, but then at Tiny Stories, now all of a sudden you're leaving a message that was racist. What did this racist message actually say? Since you're trying to say that they were targeting Black people, but now all of a sudden you're leaving something in lipstick saying what? If it's a non-Black victim.
That feels like poor policing. And like I feel like someone set up, like that's just said, like they twisted that.
Yeah, something's not
right there.
Something's not clicking. Prior to Alton Coleman's execution on April 2002, the ACLU sent a clemency letter. I gotta get it together for this.
I get it.
Dear parole board members.
Because that's how they sound.
Right. On behalf of the American Civil Liberties Union, we would ask that you commute the sentence of Alton Coleman to life in prison without the possibility of parole. This relief is warranted because Mr. Coleman's death sentence was a product of a trial that was fundamentally unfair. Prosecutors systematically excluded African Americans from serving as jurors, and his lawyer failed to investigate and present mitigating evidence that might well have spared him a death sentence. During jury selection in Mr. Coleman's trial, the prosecution used 9 of its 12 preemptory challenges to exclude otherwise qualified African American jurors. All of the excused had been passed for cause in the voir dire process and were just thus deemed ineligible by the court. The Supreme Court has stated repeatedly that racial discrimination in jury selection is an intolerable violation of the Constitution. And when the racial pattern of excluding jurors is pronounced as in Mr. Coleman's case, the government must account for its actions. Despite the fact that the prosecution in Mr. Coleman's case eliminated 82% of African American jurors and used 75% of its preemptory challenges to do so, the government has yet to provide any explanation for these actions, let alone demonstrate that racial bias was not a factor. Under the circumstances, we can have little confidence in the system that produced Mr. Coleman's death sentence. In fact, the U.S. Supreme Court recently stated an execution and agreed to hear the case of a Texas death row inmate where it was alleged that jurors were similarly excluded by the prosecution during the trial because of their race. Moreover, the failure of Mr. Coleman's lawyer to conduct a basic investigation into his psychiatric history and family background and present this evidence to the jury further undermines our trust in the outcome in this case. Had a basic investigation been conducted, it would have revealed that Mr. Coleman was abandoned in a garbage can by his own mother, who herself suffered with mental illness, that he was neglected by the grandmother who raised him, while she operated a brothel and a gambling house in her home. In this environment, Mr. Coleman was habitually abused, both physically and psychologically. He was exposed to a number of disturbing experiences, including witnessing group sex, sometimes his mother and grandmother, pedophilia, and bestiality. In addition, he twice suffered injuries, head injuries, that required hospitalization. Mr. Coleman now, and at the time of his crime, has an IQ far below average and suffers from borderline personality disorder. His mental illness was manifested itself on multiple occasions through extreme emotion, impulsive behavior, and psychotic episodes. None of this evidence was sought or ever presented as mitigating factors during the sentencing phase of trial. The ACLU opposes capital punishment in all cases as barbarous and anarchism and in violation of the Constitution. Mr. Coleman's case particularly merits clemency. Had an unbiased jury been given information about Mr. Coleman's abuse and neglect during his childhood, he likely would have not been sentenced to death. Given the detrimental consequences of a death sentence, we submit that Ohio should afford Mr. Coleman full consideration for his plea to commute his sentence to life in prison without parole. I am literally side-eyeing the ACLU for trying us with this one.
Speaking of folks doing too much, have you watched Fated Reunion yet? Then what are you waiting for? It's the perfect blend of drama and comedy and a great way to reset from all of this true crime. So, what's it about? I'm so glad you asked. Mandy is desperate to impress at her 10-year reunion and will do whatever it takes, but so is her rival Jessica. So Mandy brings along the handsome Dr. Dante Perez as her wingman, and that's when things get crazy. And guess what? It's written and directed by yours truly. Check it out now. You can watch it on Tubi or YouTube, and the best part is free. So what are you waiting for? Go watch it now.
Like, I get that that there was definitely bias on the jury and everybody should have a fair and impartial jury. And yes, there was mental illness. I just have issues with, because they murdered so many people.
For sure.
They murdered and killed so many people. So I'm kind of side-eyeing the ACLU. Like, can you just pretend that we didn't see this one?
Right.
Can you be like, nah, we're not going to fight for this one? And definitely not fight as hard as you did with that letter, because they went hard in that letter.
They really did.
They went really hard in that letter. So basically, Alton is deceased. Debra may still be with us, rotting away in prison. Thank you. So what are your thoughts on this one, Kim?
Man, I just think I'm with you with the ACLU. Like, I get it. You're angry at the system, and the system has, failed us, I'm gonna say, or failed Alton. But at the same time,
I know.
Alton, you're a murderer.
I know, you're a murderer, you're a psycho.
Right. But then,
you crisscrossed, you drove around states killing folks. I have no, oh gosh.
But if anything, I get it. It does make you want to think twice about, the legal system.
Oh, yes. The legal system is messed up. And that was definitely messed up. It basically, like,
they were in cahoots with, I feel like with this one, they could have been in cahoots with one another.
I'm sure they were.
Yeah.
And I mean, and you're going through this whole thing and you're, oh, nope, they're black. Let's get rid of them. Let's get rid of them off the jury. We definitely don't want that happening. So,
right.
Oh gosh. Okay, ACLU. I'm still side-eyeing you, ACLU, but we don't, if they're allowed to do this for this one, they're allowed to do it for others.
Right.
Which is what we don't want.
Nope.
So, my thoughts on this are that I was basically 9 years old when this was going on, because like they just had a summer of slaughter.
Right.
And I grew up in the Midwest, so they were traversing, from Wisconsin through Ohio, back over. I mean, they were just going crazy with it.
Do you remember if like during that time, like your parents were all like, don't be outside, like because it was talk of like murder and heinous crimes?
Nope. I was outside all the time. Like my family, I was always outside because I played. During that time, I wasn't playing sports in school, but I was playing sports like out our house was in between two parks.
Right.
So one park I was going to play basketball at, the other park I was playing baseball at, or football or whatever. I mean, we roamed our neighborhood like it was nothing. My mom was still working at the hospital at that time, so those long hours. I did have my siblings there, but I had a lot of time. I had a lot of time on my hands to myself and with my friends. I was outside. There was like, I don't recall there ever being a conversation during those years of not with my parents that you got to watch out for this and this. But the funny thing is, as kids, we also knew if a van or vehicle slowed down in our neighborhood, boy, we used to scatter. Like you didn't have to tell us. We knew, we knew, and we weren't hanging around. You stayed. No, we did not even get close to adults enough to know we wasn't helping nobody. If an adult needed some help, we like, get you another adult. It's like you just knew there was a different time. You just knew not to.
Right.
Like, and then I think too, because we were outside so much, we were street smart.
Right.
Yeah, and just. My other issue with this case is they were trying to say it's whole racially motivated because they targeted Black people. But I'm talking about, you're talking about during the 80s. Would any white people even went with them if they even tried to talk to them? And how do you know that they didn't try to get some white people, but the fact that they were Black themselves in this time period, wasn't nobody white going with them?
No.
It was not an opportunity for them.
No.
They went with who was there. I mean, if you're Black, you're going to be around more Black people. So that was the crime of opportunity, not so much that they were targeting Black people, but the FBI profiler, who more than likely probably was white himself.
For sure.
That's what you came up with. Okay, I'm not going to say he was probably white. That motherfucker was white because he called us Afro-Americans. Like, stop it. Yes, stop it. It's not likely they just would have been able to have the opportunity to befriend white people.
No.
And that's what they did. Yeah, they went with what they knew, but all around it was sad and it sucks for all of the victims. I am definitely thankful that they got life. Alton got the death penalty and he was executed with his long list of foods.
Right.
And Debra, if she's still around, she still got a long way to go in that 140-year sentence without the possibility of parole.
However, let's hope that her apology and remorse is sincere and that she can spend the rest of her time, repenting.
Right.
Repenting.
Well, I think that's the end of our episode of Alton Coleman and Debra Brown, the Midwest serial killers. Whew. That was a lot. Make sure you stay up with us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, all at the True Crime Remixed. You can watch us on YouTube. You can stream us on Anchor, Spotify, Apple, Amazon, and Audible. I'm so excited about that. We have many places to watch us. Depending on how you're viewing this or listening to this, make sure you leave us a comment, subscribe, like. Anchor actually allows you to leave a voice message, which is kind of cool. If you're on there, you can leave us a voice message. You can also support us on Anchor through the donation link. That would be lovely. Help us keep this podcast going.
And share.
Share. Oh, yes. Like, share, tell a friend to tell a friend to tell a friend. Yes, keep it going. This has been another episode of the True Crime Remix, and I'm your host, Omega Keys, along with my girls, Kathy Taylor and Kim Edwards. Until next time, peace, love, soul, and hair grease.